there are a few aspiring builders somewhere in here. And you guys have obviously thought a lot about this space. You're building your own things, but I'm curious to know, like, what, aside from the product or the problem that you're working on, what is one of the largest unsolved problems that you see in the modern data stack?
Dibs on, like, you know, just before everyone like brings it up, like the inevitable like Mike problem of like, well, we must find a way to think fast and think slow. And I mean, that seems to be the eternal thing everyone wants to talk about now, which is how do you do everything that we've talked about at arbitrary, you know, latency? And can these two worlds ever meet? I think I spend most of my time telling people like you're overthinking the problem, and maybe you should just, you know, use data before you talk about making it crazy fast, because most people are not that sophisticated. But I do think that's definitely something that on most people's minds.
I'm going to piggyback on that for a second and say, I feel like if anyone remembers the first time you used Google Maps, after using MapQuest or other tools, and maybe some of you guys were like 5 years old when that was happening, but aging myself. And it was like a mind-blowing moment where you're like, oh my gosh, like I can see the world outside of this 200 by 200 pixel, you know, square with a bunch of reloads. And so I think we're still waiting for that Google Maps moment for big data, where you want to be able to have a dialogue, this fluid like connection with the data where you can move through it interactively. And I think we're kind of living in like this sort of, you know, I don't know, weird world where we're solving problems, but we're just not solving them fast enough. And so the other analogy I would make is like, you know, imagine if you transmitted video over Zoom and you insisted on full fidelity, every frame sent over the internet, and like everything, of course, is super laggy. The world of data, we're just crunching so many, you know, rows and events and values that we actually don't. Because, you know, no one's looking at that like long cardinality value that had, you know, is like a mistake that someone entered. And so I think those some of those techniques, like we need codecs for data, much better compression, sketching, approximate statistics, something that'll let us get to that Google Maps moment for big data.
I know we talked a little bit about just horizontalization, I guess, of the data stack, but I think what that has actually, we swung the pendulum a little too far in the other direction. Where now, and we are ourselves guilty of this, but every tool solves a problem. And then what data teams have to go and do is say, well, okay, well, we're using mode for our visualization, and we're using Stemma for our data cataloging, and then we actually use Druid for our database, and then our analytics. You get it. Like every team just now has like, goes to the grocery store and is like, here's my credit card, now give me this SaaS product and this SaaS product and this SaaS product, and then they still all have to work together. And the more products come out, the bigger that spider net grows. And the problem with this is now you have teams that are building their own solutions to just make the products work together for them. What 5chan is doing is amazing, by the way. I am personally a massive fan of 5chan, where they're saying, look, we're just going to figure this out for you. We're going to be that middle piece, and anything you want on the left and anywhere you want on the right, and don't worry about it, we'll figure it out somehow. And it's black magic, and there's a box, and you don't worry about it. And I think that is going to start happening at all those interconnects, where there's going to be like, okay, it doesn't matter what your database is. It doesn't matter what your catalog is. It doesn't matter what your querying tool is. There's going to be all these interconnects, and either all of the tools are going to have to build them, or someone is just going to come in and become the 5chan of every single interconnect. And I think that's what is really missing.
So on one hand, I'm probably sitting here because I wrote a thing called The Missing Piece in the Modern Data Stack. So I probably I'm obligated to say it's something to do with like metrics and what like Transform and Supergrain and folks are building. Though I think actually in a lot of cases, we're like, to your point earlier, we're making this too complicated. Like the thing that's actually missing is people build a bunch of stuff with data and don't really get any value out of it. They build a bunch of dashboards that nobody looks at, and then they do a bunch of analysis that is like the actual thing that helps people make decisions, but they immediately forget what it was as soon as they make that decision. And so like, to me, the thing that's actually missing here is we have all of these like governance tools for things like dashboards and stuff that are largely unused. And then the actual value of our data is what analysts do with it that we don't keep track of at all. Like we don't actually learn from that outside of the individual decision we make. I don't know what that solution is, and this is something that's very adjacent to what Node does. But to me, it's like we can talk all about like the technology that's missing and stuff like that. Fundamentally, people invest a lot of money in data and probably don't get that much value out the other end. They expect to get all this stuff where they're like going to make all these brilliant decisions. Do we make that many better decisions now than we did 20 years ago? Like, probably not. You know, we can keep track of what's happening better, but I don't know that we're actually making that many better decisions, which given the promise of what this is, feels like the real piece that we're missing.
I 100% agree with you. Data is a cost center at every single business, and no one. But I think really the hardest part there is just measuring what is the value of the decisions you're making off of your data. Like if I'm going to look at a dashboard, and I'm an executive, and I go and I look at a dashboard, and that dashboard tells me something, and I change something about my business. What was the ROI? I don't know, but now I, as the executive, get all the kudos for that, and all of the work that that the analyst did, that the data scientist did, that the data engineer did to get that data to me has gone really unrecognized. So I think we are making better decisions now than we were 20 years ago. I just think that the respect and the ROI like finger pointing is in the wrong direction. And if we can somehow start measuring that, then that would really turn that around.
Sure. One thing I do want to point out on that is execs don't look at dashboards and make decisions. Execs look at dashboards and ask someone else to help them make a decision. And like I think that actually is an important difference. Is there is a lot of work that goes into the dashboard is kind of the starting point of okay, what do we do now? And that then follow-up work is what gets lost kind of into the ether. And I think that's one of the things we're really missing when we capture. Like one of the things we really should be capturing better that we don't. And that's probably one of the reasons why the ROI is so hard to figure out is because the dashboard produced a question, but not really the decision of what to do.
But in terms of the decisions and the ROI that I'm thinking about is really at that macro level where you are a marketing executive and your team presents your dashboard and Uber's marketing budget is measured in the billions, which is now public information, so I am allowed to say that. And if I have to say, do I spend more money on Facebook ads or do I spend more money on Instagram ads? And I can look at a dashboard and I can trust my data and I can say, yes, I should really just stop spending money on Facebook because it's costing me $250K a week and I'm not getting anything out of it. Then that is a serious ROI to the business. It's the delta. And so then, but then we need to that needs to come full circle and that needs to get measured. The incremental, we can outprice Lyft on a trip by 5 cents and because everyone's price sensitive and consumer goods are a race to the bottom, then yeah, that's one thing, but it really is about those macro decisions being made in the business.